What would you rather have? An ally or a friend? This is one of the central questions that Rinku and I explore in this episode of the podcast. Rinku Sen right now is the executive director of the Narrative Initiative, and she has been one of the foremost thinkers of race in the country for the last 3 decades. She used to run a place called Race Forward before it was called Race Forward. She was doing this work on race long before the most recent racial uprising. She really is one of the leading voices on this central American concern. I know it's not exclusively ours, but it is defining to our identity as a country. And in exploring this question, I think she opens up a whole lot of possibility for us. I don't want to get ahead of the conversation, but I can tell you that for me, friendship has been almost a religion. And that the question of whether I'd rather have an ally in my struggle or a friend is a question that touches some of my deepest and most dearly held beliefs. It opens up new possibility. I really think you're going to enjoy this wide ranging conversation because we talk about so much more. We've known each other for almost 2 decades. We've been in these movements doing this work. And I think we get to some really, really meaningful places. I know you're going to enjoy it. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. My name is Gibrán Rivera, if you don't know me yet. I am a coach. I am a guide. I'm a facilitator and a teacher. And with this podcast, I am inviting you into a decentralized conversation with remarkable leaders, remarkable people who are devoting their lives to the evolution of consciousness and culture. I know that your attention is invaluable, and I'm really grateful that you're giving us an ear. Enjoy, share, and participate. Rinku, great
Gibrán.
to see you. Great to see you again. Um, where do I start? I've known you for a long time. We've known each other for a long time. We've formed a friendship. We have seen each other grow and change. Um, you are known by many hats that you've worn, and I'd love to hear some about the hat you're wearing right now. But maybe I can I can start by saying that when I met you, you were leading what later became Race Forward, and that your writing on race was momentous and shaped a lot of movement thinking long before this latest wave of reawakening, right? Like I feel like our entire relationship with race in this country is like uprising, it matters, it defines all kinds of moves,
Mhm.
and then somehow like the regressive forces take over again, and so long before this latest uprising, you were really leading the way, giving us language for contending with racial justice. So I just wanted to acknowledge your both your writing and your strategic work and your organization or leadership around all of that, and maybe even shout out uh, what is still the Chuck Foundation for Public Education, which
Yeah,
was, I think, how we actually met. I think we were both
it
board
is.
members of
I'm
that.
pretty
So
sure that's how we
yeah,
met too. Hmm.
yeah. So that's a little bit about who you've been. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to now?
Yeah, I'd be so happy to. I left Race Forward in 2017, and at the end of 2020, I accepted a position as executive director of Narrative Initiative. Our mission there is to help social movements, their leaders, their members, build the power that it takes to move big ideas through collections of stories, stories that we create through our action or inaction, and stories that we tell about the things we created, the things our ancestors created, the things our children and grandchildren are going to create. So So it's super fun work, like the best fun I've had at work ever, because we see ourselves as organizers. We are organizers who want to build narrative power to go along with the political and economic and disruptive and cultural power that movements have to have. They have to have this kind of power too, um, and we're a small team of 15 working all over the country who help people do that.
That's awesome. That is awesome, and I can't. It's an awareness that has been brewing in among those who want to change the world, who want more justice, who want social movements to succeed over the last number of years. It's been around. It's just kind of catching fire. Just today, I'm gonna share two things with you. Um, just today, I sent out a note to a couple of hundred men that are part of the Better Men Project.
Mm-hmm.
And we have we've been just reading a book, like a section at a time. But the first thing that we read before this book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, was uh, a piece by Adrian Murray Brown on relinquishing the patriarchy. So today I was like, we're gonna pause at the book, even though it's great, because I read this brilliant piece by a thinker called Alex Benier. And what I like about him is he's, well, from what you might call that heterodox world, meaning he's not like on the progressive pole, and he's not on the right wing pole. He's just very intentionally people that are very intentionally trying to like dance in between,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a place that I'm trying to get to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel way more freedom in that than in like the binds of ideology. Long introduction to what I'm trying to say, which is he wrote this piece where he's looking at a movie,
Mm-hmm.
The Banshees of Inisherin.
Yes, I
I haven't
just
watched
saw
it.
it recently. Yep.
A game, right? As in gaming, because it's game. I'm not a gamer, but there's stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I think is called The Gods of War,
Mm-hmm.
and a TV show, which is called The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
And he's illustrating how each one of them have a take on masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One which might be more like the progressive idea of like we are hopeless, and like, and one is like no, actually, like there's a holy masculine that is needed, and like something in between. But like I bring it all up to say narrative form, cultural form,
Mm-hmm.
as a way to get at what is unsettled in men who want to be good
Mm-hmm.
in a world that is still defined by patriarchy,
Yeah.
right? And so what we say every time, every Better Men Project call, I'm like, we're very clear about what toxic masculinity is. We've done it. We're told what it is, right? And if we want to be a good guy, you gotta just take your masculinity and turn it down a couple notches. And so what we're trying to do is like, how is there such a thing as conscious masculinity, and an alternative to turning it down,
Mm-hmm.
which is remaining masculine if you identify it as man
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is helpful to the world. And the fact that he's taking narrative forms
Mm-hmm.
get at this question, I feel like re-emphasizes to me the importance of your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I mean, the thing is that we're all actually narrating all the time through our conversation, through the things we do. Um, and, human beings are natural storytellers and story lovers. Our brains, for a whole set of neurological reasons and evolutionary reasons, have learned to accept lessons in the form of stories best, to accept morals in the form of stories better than we accept them in the form of facts or in more didactic forms, and and so we're natural lovers of stories, but we're also natural tellers of stories. And we are obviously, because we live, natural creators of stories. So, what our work is about at Narrative Initiative is getting people to see that they're narrating all the time. Ultimately, we have a vision of equipping millions of everyday narrators, because that's our greatest resource. Getting our stories onto Netflix or CNN or Amazon. I'm always thrilled when that happens. That's really, really important. But we don't control those
Right.
platforms. We control ourselves, though. That's our first control. Um, our first means of production, so to speak, is our thoughts and our voices. So, and our art, our voices, broadly considered. So, it's possible to tell a beautiful story that has a lesson that actually isn't helping us so much change the way that, for example, Americans think about borders or
Right.
who belongs here and who doesn't. We can tell beautiful stories of immigrants that maybe because it's like a heroic individual single immigrant story, it actually hides the structural barriers to immigration, or the structural things and the systemic things that make migration so difficult, so deadly in many cases, and still so attractive to
Right.
so many people, and things like that. So we want to be not just creating stories through, let's say, movement tactics and telling stories beautifully through our art. We need to grapple with the ideas,
Yeah.
and um, and we need to be not looking to the right wing for how best to do that, because they're an entirely different movement from
Right.
us. They have different goals, they have different resources, they have different norms. Um, but that doesn't mean that we don't have ourselves the means
Yeah.
to make our ideas dominant in the society. We have done it before, and we will do it again. And people are doing it to varying degrees right now, all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so much of the so much of the backlash, right, from the right wing right now, I think comes specifically because we have succeeded in changing some like fundamental stories, and
Definitely.
it's just terrifying, right? Just terrifying for people that want to imagine a fantastical past where there wasn't oppression and white folks were all Christians doing everything right. Like I would say, if I've been curious about what would it take, maybe if it were helpful at all, right? What would
Mhm.
it take for people that want goodness and justice to be able to gather 10,000 people in a building week after week to sing together,
Mhm.
to to form small groups that helps them with their finances or with their
Mhm.
marriages, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like the mega church experience, right? And like I'm not sure what it would take. I know that we don't have the advantage of a 2,000-year-old meme that promises eternal salvation, right? So when I hear you say we can't do it that way, I
We have
think
2,000-year-old memes, and we can appropriate any other memes that we want to appropriate. There's a lot of debate over the meaning of Jesus's presence in the world,
right.
you know, the big world, and that's one of the arenas that I don't think we should give up.
I like it. I like
all
it.
of our all every spiritual tradition in the world has something for us. We can decide to claim it or not,
That's right.
but I don't think that um, uh, I don't accept that the dominant versions of Christianity, for example, or um, Hinduism, which is the tradition I was raised in,
Yeah.
can't change,
That's
can't,
right. That's right. Yeah.
shift.
Yeah. What we have here now is Christian nationalism, right?
Yeah.
Which is its own thing. I'll say I want to share some thoughts, including that now being in a blended family relationship, right?
Hmm.
My love has teenagers, and then my my siblings also have teenagers. My son is still 11.
Hmm.
Um, it's amazing to witness the way it's like the way in which they story themselves is much more obvious because it's much younger, right? So they're literally taking a persona and trying it on. They don't think that's what they're doing, right? But they're
Hmm.
trying it on, and then
Hmm.
because it's what they're trying on because they saw it somewhere and it's attractive to them, they
Hmm.
actually literally got to go around asserting, right? Like I am not like happy and jolly like you
Right.
know, like I this is who I am, you know, I don't like this and I
I'm a
am
cynic.
angry about that, and it's just literally a storying of ourselves, right?
Hmm.
And in the healthiest of situations we try a couple on and then we realize that that can be foolish and that there can be you can definitely tell a healthier story
Yeah.
and then you
Well,
don't go around asserting it, you know what I mean, that you can just
yeah.
be it, you know, in some way.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about how, when I was a kid, we moved quite often. We came to the States in 72. And then before 1980, I think we had moved four times. Yeah, three or four more times. And, even as a kid, each time you move, at least this is the effect it had on me, there, I was very aware as a child of like an opportunity to reinvent myself.
Nice. Right.
And I think maybe because we were immigrants, and even when you're an immigrant child, I was 5.5, so old enough to like be aware of everything around me. Um, you There's a kind of um, adaptation,
Right.
um, skill, vibe, imperative that you kind of get used to. And it's like you're adapting to the next part of your environment, but you're also adapting to yourself and who you want to be. And because in a new place, no one knows you, I just remember as a kid, like really being aware that in a new place, no one will know me, and
Mhm.
I can carry some things with me and I can leave some things behind if
Nice.
I
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
And I think humans are doing that all the time.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that, and it makes sense. And it got me thinking about okay, so what is the story that we want to tell, right? And some of the ways in which I think about it is I look a lot at the way in which modernity
Yeah. Hmm.
and postmodernity, but modernity um, robbed us of explicit ritual. So,
Hmm.
for example, so mm, not ritual, like robbed us of mythos is what I mean to say,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It's like either the world was created in 7 days in a fundamentalist truth kind of way,
Hmm.
or it's a scientific lie.
Right.
Like the fact that as if our ancestors thought, okay, if I actually go to that mountain, I'm going to visibly see Zeus throwing down thunder. Like our ancestors were sophisticated. Like they understood the mythological, which is the realm of story as a different
Mhm.
reality, but a reality nevertheless,
Mhm.
right? And so I feel like what those stories have done, you pointed to already, is help us answer questions like how and why. Like,
Mhm.
how did we get here? Why are we here? Right? And like, how are we going to be? What is the best way to be here, given that in most of cases, they have faced apocalypses already, right? Like, when
Mhm.
shit gets hard, how are you going to be? Like, this is what the stories are telling us.
Yeah.
And, and so when we lose that in modernity,
Mhm.
it gets replaced like by something that is could be somewhat helpful but is emptier, which is ideology, right?
Uh-huh.
So now I have this ideological way, right, oftentimes containing a utopian future that I
Mhm.
can actually come make into reality, um where that I'm it's actually trying to replace mythos,
Mhm. Mhm.
story, spirit, ritual, right? And in it, we are left with these spaces that are too often devoid of
Mhm.
joy, right? I'm like, listen, I say to people a lot, I'm like, I had this friend and I love what they're trying to do. You know, they want to build solidarity economy,
Mhm.
right? But I'm like, you really think like how many people are you gonna get to come every week to make these economic decisions together? Like when they can just hit one button on Amazon. Like the space has to have some joy. It has to have some
Right.
human connection. It has to have a bigger story that is not just ideological, right? Because only the most hardcore, and you and I know them, right,
Mhm.
will keep showing up for 20 years, right? Even if there's no mythos in it. No,
If yeah, even
yeah,
if there's no fun. I
yeah.
mean, that's an interesting distinction between mythos and ideology. I think, I mean, where I'm at right now is I I resist dogma of any kind, and I don't resist like patterns. You know, I seek patterns. I don't resist lessons. I like to think,
Mhm.
but I really think that, as you noted, binaries do not help us. They almost, I can't really think of one that helps us. When you're in campaign mode and you need to put choices in front of people, it's either this or this, you know, it's either cop city or, you know, services that communities need in and around Atlanta. Um, I'm referring to the Georgia plan to build this
Yeah,
giant cop training uh, campus. Um, so, you know, in campaign mode, those kind of polarizations can be very useful because you need people actually to choose and you need to define the choice rather than letting your opposition or the system define the choice. Um, but most of life is not binary. You know, we have 4 seasons and they kind of meld into each other. It's not like there's a hard winter and a hard summer and, you know,
right.
exactly the, you know,
Great.
exact same time every year you shift. um, Nature does not work in binaries and neither should we. It seems to me like it's kind of basic, and so yeah, I find myself resisting like this or that kind of thinking, um and I find that in between there's a lot there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. That's great. I definitely want to get into one of the big frames that you're working with. Um, in a second, I'm gonna leaving people in suspense. But it's what inspired me to find to be like, okay, I have to talk to Rinku now. But before I get to that, I have one more thing on story
Mhm.
that you might appreciate. I'm curious about your thoughts. So you were talking about this kind of natural thing in us that responds to it
Mhm.
and makes us both storytellers and make us like thirsty for them, right? Um, and I thought about a couple of things as you said it, which is there were there were no books for most of humanity, right? There were no there no internet for most of humanity, right? Like,
I don't know.
and we had to like somehow stories help us remember, right?
Mhm.
Like that over like bullet points and facts,
Mhm.
and uh, and songs, right? So the songs tell the
Mhm.
stories tell the stories, and the rituals tell the stories, right?
Mhm.
We enact, and
Mhm.
so what this brought me to think about is I've been following the thought of a guy called John Vervaeke recently. I think he's one of the most important thinkers in the Western cultural tradition right now,
Mhm.
right? Out of the University of Toronto, but lots of YouTube stuff and like embodied, right? Like not just a head guy,
Mhm.
like beautiful human. And he was talking about different ways of knowing, and he was talking about propositional. And propositional is this place at which we like make our arguments, right, about what the facts are,
Mhm.
right? Then he was talking about um, procedural, which is like how to do things. Then he was talking about perspectival, which is like right now I'm doing a podcast with you. So this is foregrounded. How I do a podcast, our friendship, the nature of our conversation, and everything else in the background, right?
Mhm.
Like I have the capacity to shift perspectives. In a bit, I'll be with Tuesday, and like my insane love for her will be foregrounded, right? Um, uh, uh, but um, but then he finally gets to participatory knowing,
Mhm.
which is like where the agent, you, and the arena, everything else around you, are shaping each other,
Mhm.
right? And like, and it's like he points to even like metaphors and like how many words are metaphors for something
Mhm.
embodied, like understanding, right?
Mhm.
Apprehending, right?
Mhm.
Leaning into,
Mhm.
right? Feeling open, right?
Mhm.
Feeling like so there are all these.
Yeah.
So what I'm making sense of from what you're telling me is that there's something about stories that trigger our participatory knowing, right? There's
Mhm.
not just like a bunch of ideas pulled together,
Mhm.
right? But in our mind, we in kind of losing ourselves in it. We like embody the
Completely.
participants, right? Like or the archetypes that we want to be uh or not be or
Yeah.
what we contend with, you know?
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting factoid on along those lines. It turns out that when you're really super engaged in a story, you're reading a book or you're watching a movie or listening to music, when you're super engaged, your body will go through the same reactions that the protagonist is going through. So when you're watching a horror movie, why do you flinch? Nobody's coming out with an axe to get you. It's just a movie.
Right.
But it's involuntary. Like you don't have to agree that you have to tell your brain, hey, we're gonna like really identify with this protagonist. But when the story is skillfully told, that is the effect on
Yes.
or skillfully made. It is an embodied effect, and anything that you experience in your body, like in multiple parts of your body, so your brain, certainly your eyes, if you're looking at something, um, um, your sweat glands if you get nervous or anxious while you're watching, a thriller, or you laugh, and then your, you know, lungs and mouth and depending on what kind of laugher you are, like lots of other parts of your body are involved. And there's just no way that that cannot be more powerful than having only your linear, logical, sorting brain
Yeah.
part engaged. So, and this is human and nature stuff. It does not rely on ideology. So, I could have very, Marxist radical ideas and still be, still cry at the end of some film that's got that's like, I don't know, individual poor person makes it, by their own
Right.
straps and all that kind of thing. I could still be very, very moved by that story and sucked into its moral, which is you're on your own. You'd better, get it together. Um, because the storytelling is so good, the quality
That's
is
right.
so good. So, yeah, your body knows what it wants, as always, and it tells you things. And that's true in politics and social justice work as it is anywhere,
That's
at
right.
the bank or at school.
Thank you for the gift of your attention. If there's something here that resonates for you, something that feels true and good, think about a friend that you could share it with. We curate for each other, and that's the only way the good stuff spreads. I think it's a good way to get into the heart of the conversation I've been dying to have with you. Um, there is, and it merits knowing, as I mean, maybe even as a transition, that this is why dogmatic people have to be so rigid, right? If you are either like a hyper woke movement fundamentalist or a Christian right person, like you need to create blocks so that hard barriers so that you're not impacted by the natural kind of impetus in you to respond
Hmm.
to stories that you might not agree with.
Hmm.
You have to be rigid, right? Um, and so a lot of this rigidity um, has shown up for in my work around racial justice, right? Like Tuesday and I started a class called "What Should White People Do?" and
Uh-huh.
the point of that class for us was to offer something
Hmm.
that was not as dogmatic, that was not like trying to guilt and shame people,
Hmm.
that was not offering people the 11 things they must do if they want to be an anti-racist, right? Just not wanting to be in that game, but knowing that racism is real. Um, and so and so you and I were sitting at Creative Change at Sundance last summer, being intentional about catching up in the middle of being with so many other people, and we started to talk about this, and you provoked me and moved me with this idea that we gotta move beyond allyship, right? And you called allyship like a very low threshold, an off-the-shelf answer, right? That one probably you can get the 11 or 9 things you can do to be an ally. And you said something about friendship. What is friendship instead?
Hmm.
And I want to hear about that. And one of the things I immediately hear is that there's something participatory in it,
Hmm.
right? So, how
Hmm.
have you? Tell me about this. Just like
Right.
how did you come up with it? How are people receiving it? How
Yeah,
is it moving? I am beyond excited about it.
I love that. It really came out of my work. So, 30 years, maybe a little more now, I've put into trying to make racial justice solutions take hold and feminist, get things organized by feminist principles. And I've been fighting hard for a long time to make change, working hard. And after, um, you know, the last few years I was at Race Forward, the last two were preparing for, just before the 2016 election, coming to understand that Trump was going to win that election, watching him win that election, and then living out the aftermath, right, all the way through to the pandemic starting. And um, I think it was the combination of leaving a job I'd had for a long time and having space, and then when the pandemic hit, like thinking really hard, having a lot of opportunity to reflect by myself, alone. And what came to me kind of as I thought about the last few years, once I was in pandemic, was um, that everywhere I go, I see people who crave deep connection.
Yes.
They know, um, often intellectually they know we need each other in order to win the bigger things that we can't win by ourselves. We need this community needs this other community needs this other community. Intellectually, they know that, and um, and people are searching for effective frameworks for the like effective connection practice that will help all our work move forward. But there's so much fear. There's fear of betrayal. There's a ton of distrust. There's some of those rules that you're talking about, Gibrán, are about making people prove that they are with you enough to get you to give them an assignment, get you to include them in something.
Mm.
Um, because I get it. Nobody wants to waste their time. We've all had bad experiences with so-called friends and allies. We've been used. We've been abandoned when it really counted. Like bad shit has happened to all of us, um, and it has made us afraid. And some folks stepped into that breach and created some frameworks around allyship. What does it mean to be a good ally? And some of the things I really appreciate about what they did is like it did get established in that period that it's not the allies' job to like step in and save somebody or
Right.
like do everything for them. It's paternalism and allyship are not, they don't go together. And I really appreciated that. And some of where I first experienced that framework and use was actually in queer spaces, queer movement, where people would ask, like, are you queer or are you an ally? Um, so so that I really, it's important to me to acknowledge the like good, high level, sophisticated, strategic intention that
Beautiful.
went into creating those materials and frameworks. Um,
Thank you for saying that.
yeah, what I think though is that capitalism messes with all of our shit, takes it all, turns it into something we wouldn't necessarily recognize. And our social justice movements, we operate in capitalism. This is capitalism that we're working in. Some of us have developed less capitalistic ways of sustaining ourselves and our constituencies and our organizations, but capitalism is where we live. And what I feel like has happened over time with the allyship frame is that we've become very consumerist about it. So the rigidity goes with this vibe that's like, you have to show up in exactly these ways, those 11 rules, or I really can't mess with you. Like, I really just can't have much to do with you at all. And, um, it's like I like to joke that it's like we went to Costco and ordered an ally, and when they come with their own like personalities and thoughts, and they're not robots, we're like, oh, but I ordered one that didn't expect to be thanked ever.
Right.
only did what I told them to do, never had their own ideas, didn't try to mess around in the important bits like strategy, but, you know, were there for whatever we needed. And this one seems to want things, so I want to give them back, or this one seems to like have ideas, want to give 'em back. This one offended me, got to give them back. And I don't think that's a good relationship. A
That's
relationship in which one party expects never to be consulted about anything, asked for their input, thanked. Like, I just, it's basic human interaction to like thank somebody who does something, even if you ask them to do it and expected them to do it. If they do it well, we say thank you. Like, it's not that big a deal. Um, so I'm sitting in my like apartment in New York at that time, and someone actually asked me to do a session on leadership, like important things for leaders to think about or know now. And I decided to do it on the role of friendship in making social change. And I started to ponder and reflect on the role of friendship, not as a replacement for allyship, but maybe as a supplement that I feel like actually enables deep the the deepest connections we can make, and the kind we need to make um, to be a unified set of movements. My dream is one movement, like not 50 movements in an alliance, but one movement that has lots of different goals and constituencies involved in it. And that is prepared to stand up for those constituencies and goals because they are our constituencies and goals. The limitation of allyship is we're not in it together.
right.
There's a suffering and fighting partner, and there's an enabling and empowering. Some folks like that word. I hate it. I don't think anybody ever needs empowerment. We all have innate power. The trick is to make the conditions where we feel able to exercise that power individually and collectively. So those are the limitations of, those are like the sticky movement organizing leadership. How do we tell people what to do? Problems that I was trying to deal with. And once I started researching, I became pretty convinced. I became convinced quite quickly that actually friendship has always been a core, fundamental, foundational driver of social change. And we don't acknowledge that at all as a movement. No one talks. I mean, we all talk about like my friends here and my friends there. And there's the joke about like fake friends, my Black friend, my Indian friend, that my, queer friend, my trans friend, who racist and transphobic and homophobic people will pull up to justify their homophobia, their regressive ideas. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what I think of as just friendships, friendships that are marked by, enjoyment. People like each other and enjoy being together. By commonality, like we like to actually do, or reciprocity, we do things for each other. Um, we will do each other favors, reciprocity. Um, but the third element of just friendship, in my mind, is that we share a common concern for the world and a common project in improving it, changing it. So good friends make good works, and good works make better friends, and sometimes, good friends, new friends. So I just started reading about like different sets of friends. I found a lot in W.E.B. Du Bois and Jane Addams's friendship, and their friendship actually points to a movement theme, which is that mutual aid, friends in community helping each other out so that the entire community could lift up out of whatever they needed to lift up out of, that is common to every single one of our communities, white immigrant communities in this country, indigenous communities that formed, urban Indian centers, to help each other survive and thrive, after conquest. Um, after conquest, Black communities before, during, and after slavery.
Right.
So Du Bois and Jane Addams started settlement houses. Du Bois is basically the first sociologist to invented sociology, and the two of them started the NAACP with Du Bois. Them and other people as well, but they were two of the initial board members. Du Bois founded the Crisis magazine. Their friendship, one of the most moving ones to me, is between Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh,
Wow.
someone you and I have both um, learned from and followed. And their friendship is interesting because the power dynamics are complicated. So they became friends while King was a civil rights leader, um, was on his way to winning the Nobel Prize, if not having won it already, American. And the US was at war in Vietnam, and Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese Buddhist priest committed to peace, trying to, one of the things he did was create a neutral zone in Vietnam where North and South Vietnamese people could go and be. And Thich Nhat Hanh wrote an open letter to Martin Luther King saying, I appreciate your resistance to the war on behalf of Black Americans. That's really important. Could you include Vietnamese people in your narrative and in your intervention around the war? We're
Right.
really suffering and we need your help. And that, then they became friends. They met up in international spaces. The that relationship is really, really shaped King's Beyond Vietnam speech, which is the big speech that really, he'd been working against Vietnam, but Beyond Vietnam made him an anti-militarist, it
Mhm.
put his stake in the ground around war, not just because Black soldiers would, die and suffer and then face discrimination when they came back, but because the people um, in the people in the other country would also die and suffer, and
Right.
it would feed their oppression. So that's just I just don't think that speech would have been that speech if King hadn't been willing to let Thich Nhat Hanh influence him. And the rest of Thich Nhat Hanh's life after King was assassinated, and his commitment to beloved community, that would not have been the
That's
case
amazing.
had they
That's a beautiful story.
not had that friendship.
What a
Um,
wonderful thing to share. Thank you.
yeah, and so everywhere I looked, and as I started asking people and looking into my own life, I find these very meaningful friendships, often across lines of power, that folks had to really work to build. Um, and I think we should pay more attention to them and to it.
That is just that's remarkable. Give me a second. I'm actually just putting my shoe on.
Uh-huh.
That's why I'm moving. To
I'm gonna
mark
take
the
that in my
time here. But the the I got so much, and I maybe want to give you a little bit of my personal story background.
Yeah, great.
So in sixth grade, which is interesting because my son is about to be in sixth grade, and
Hmm.
they say you can remember your traumatic experiences, right? When you see your kids enter that age, and not that I ever forgot, but that's when we moved to the mainland United States. And I was old enough to know I
Mhm.
didn't want to leave. I was old enough to know I had a great life.
Mhm.
I loved Puerto Rico. I loved my friends and I loved my life.
Mhm.
Something was being done to me, right? And it was. And it was also the age at which I became a person of color.
Mhm.
And in a pretty racist place, pretty much right away being seen as less than, um,
Mhm.
as even dangerous. I was hauled to a police station at the age of 12.
Mhm.
And what do you do to a 12-year-old kid in a police station, right? It's just like, you can only do that if you dehumanize people.
Mhm.
But I missed my friends. And on my last day of school, I was brought before the auditorium, and my friends sang me a friendship song. And everybody cried their way through it. And I say that from that day on, friendship became a core value in my life, like a
Mhm.
life defining idea and practice.
Mhm.
And I often joke that one day I'll finally start I used to say church, and I'll be more of a congregation to be more inclusive. And it will be called the Congregation of Coevolution through Friendship,
Mhm.
right? So that's how important this idea is to me. And I am moved by your words in so many ways. One of which is in the Allies story, we're spending a lot of time telling them what to do
Mhm.
and how to show up. In the friendship story, there might be some of that, like, hey, this is what a good friend looks like. Um, but it implies your co-participation. It implies you're making a choice to take this person who belongs to a group
Mhm.
that has harmed you over and over again, that might be ignorant of your experience, but whose heart actually wants to meet you, right?
Mhm.
And be in friendship enough with them to stick it out as they find their way, right? And I think any story that lays the responsibility on you is
Mhm.
a story that makes you the agent with power,
Right.
right? And it also helps you become a better human. So I
Mhm.
love what you were talking about being in capitalism and movements being split and all having to be the coalition of this or that. And like um, uh, Tuesday was on a call the other day, and somebody was like introduced as a Canadian who was born and as an Israeli Canadian who is this, right? And like it's like this idea that you have to start every sentence with as by asserting the nuances of your identity, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's like completely splitting. And what we need to understand is that the industrial age, right, which is where the extraction happens, right, where we extract from the earth so exponentially that we are actively robbing from our descendants, right, which is counter-revolutionary, like we're
Mhm.
stealing from the future at an aggressive rate.
Mhm.
It depends on the compartmentalization of life,
Mhm.
right? It has to silo things, right, in order to measure them and grab them. There's a hole that we live in, and that's why like our medicine is compartmentalized, right? Like our movements are compartmentalized. Our work, people, when I work with organizations, everything is in a silo, right? It's
Mhm.
just this is why people are trying to. A lot of men, right, are trying to be like the manager or the worker in the office, and then still like in an archaic way, the head of the household at home, and then like you do spirituality in this other corner of your life, right? It's all, and so So when you are in friendship with someone, right, you do more of these things together, right? It's like
Right.
what you're saying about, it's like about the integration of life, right?
Mhm.
So many movements are started by crews, like I love this story in like this beautiful biography of Van Gogh,
Mhm.
right, where Van Gogh always tortured, coming into art, and he is working in the style of the Dutch masters, which is kind of shadows and darkness, right? And then his brother invites him to Paris, and he sees the Impressionists for the first time. And you can imagine it must have been like taking acid for the first time, right? It's like, and he is just so baffled, right? And like he just runs around the city like a madman in tears, because then he becomes one of the great impressionists. But those people are a crew influencing each other, right? Fighting and arguing with each other. Like that is a big part of friendship. I think if I was to say a couple of quick things before passing the microphone back to my actual guest, um, it's um, it's like I have this concern, right, with reclaiming our humanity. And I often talk about the lawn sign that says, "In this house, we believe in love, we believe in science," and like the last sentence is like, "We believe in kindness." And I'm like, that's the one that seems to be practiced least. It's like the affirmation of the beliefs, right? But like, and I'm like, I want to come back to kindness. I want to come back to compassion. I want to come back to remembering our humanity, which is what I consider actually awakening, which is different from awokening. And and that, I am convinced that the way there is a process, is in relationship. It's a process that a teacher I know, who's actually about to pass, but a wonderful teacher, Patricia Albert, she started a practice called mutual awakening practice, where you're no longer just meditating by yourself. I am I am in deep, beautiful relationships with these teachers called um, Elizabeth DeBolt, whose feminist rating you might know, and Thomas Steinerberg, who talk about emergence consciousness dialogue, right? Like emergent consciousness, like where you and I are talking, but what we're trying to do is tune into what the space between us actually wants to say, getting ourselves out of the way. So all of these things, and even my facilitation work, right? It's works best. Like my goal is for people to build relationships that are far going to outlast the event or their organizational affiliation. And that there are degrees of friendship. Like I consider you my friend. We don't talk every month. You know what I mean? Like we catch up, and like there's this mutual appreciation and care for each other. And when we talk, we trust each other enough to talk about intimate, personal things that you're not going to share with everybody else, and I'm not going to start talking about here in the podcast, right? And there's this contours to friendship that you might have bandwidth for this circle of close ones that you're nurturing all the time, but you have space in your heart for this broader circle of people, right? But the relationship is not transactional, right?
I think that's key. The relationship is not transactional. And yes, like you and I don't see each other a lot. We don't check in that often. Um, but I know if I really needed you, Gibran, you would do what I needed you to do. And I know you well enough to be able to think of like things that only you could help me with. And I assume that's, kind of mutual. Like there are
For
things
sure.
that you might need, you would call me and I would do it. Um, you know, I think the the thing is, as I've gotten older and as the challenges to making real change become more and more clear to me, like, when you've been in the work 5 years, you see some of the challenges, but if you've won anything in those 5 years, like winning is kind of part of your picture of how this goes. So over 30 or 35 years, more things enter that picture. And I find myself now looking less for what is different about all of us and more for what we have in common,
I
what we
see.
want in common,
Yeah.
what we want. And there are some things we all want. We all want freedom. We all want control over our bodies. We all want to be able to take care of and be with our communities and families. We all want meaningful work, whether paid or unpaid. Like meaningful work and pay doesn't have, they're not together, but we all want meaningful work. And, like, I think we all kind of like living on the earth. Like,
Right.
we have that in common. So there's that. And something Barbara Smith taught me, Barbara Smith, who is, really one of the leading lights of third wave feminism and feminisms of color and of intersectionality before that word was a word. But, a Barbara's a theorist and an activist on how to solve a problem for everybody, how to solve a problem for not just the people you know the best and who are closest to you, but just by looking around at who else might be experiencing that problem, maybe in the same way, maybe in different ways. I think she's just really skilled at that. And one thing Barbara said to me recently is you have to be able to look at systems honestly and rigorously and you know analyze systems, and then you have to be able to look at individuals as themselves.
I
You have to be
see.
able to do both, like understand the system you're in and how it works, and understand the individual as an individual. So, and maybe you'll get along and find common cause and do things with that individual. Maybe you won't, but you can't judge the individual as though they are the system. You have to judge them as human beings because that's what
Yeah.
they are. So, so I really appreciate that. And I think that's like a discernment thing. And that's where, rigidity and difficult feelings come in because um, there are so many people who wouldn't be in the movement if the first friend hadn't recruited them. And if
That's right.
that first friend hadn't been um, kind about the things they didn't know, the words they didn't have yet, the identities they hadn't explored, the education they hadn't accessed. Um, there would be very, very few people in our organizations and movements
That's right.
if there hadn't been friendly recruiters
Yeah.
who were good at those things at
Exactly.
inviting participation. And, I want to also say about guilt and shame that actually does work for some people.
Right.
Some people need a hard push because their environment or because their environment has really reinforced the wrong thing for many
Yeah.
years, or because they're not used to being challenged, and
Mhm.
some folks really need that. So I I I really try not to dismiss anybody who's trying to help us all do better. Um, and I think most people, when they get the hard push, um, many people decide to stop at that point. Many people can't actually take the guilt and remorse and shame hard push. It won't take them to the next step.
Yeah.
So I just want us to have a range of like a relationship options, um, and be open
Yeah.
to going as deep as we might be able to.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I want to honor what you're saying. I think sometimes I just get so put off by it. But I do get it. I do get how I myself have come to some of the most important transformations in my life when I have literally brought shame upon myself to my behaviors, you know?
Yeah.
And, and one time, like one of the major, most transformational breakdowns in my life, I remember having like the experience, you know how they say like your life flashes before your eyes? It wasn't exactly my life, but it was all of the times
Mm,
in which people in my life, like in this, I'm gonna say like women in my life were really like, dude, like you're being really patriarchal right now. And
mhm.
in my head, because I had a feminist ideology,
Right.
I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a fucking feminist. Like I used to be active Catholic, and I'm not even in that anymore. Like
You know from patriarchy, right?
right, exactly. And so then like bad things. Then I made bad mistakes, and I'm like, oh my god, like people try to tell me, right? And so then the question then is, so I think as a sometimes that kind of shakeout is necessary, ideally before you fuck up, or but
When the
it's
stakes are so low.
yeah, it's just where it becomes an ongoing thing and an ongoing posture. And like there's definitely a personality type, right? Because I do a lot of healing work now, right? That is a sucker for it. You know what I mean? Like there is like a type of white person, a type of man that they're actually working out some like old parent shit, right? And they're subconsciously appreciating that somebody is reminding them of how much they suck because it confirms a belief among themselves. And like that's so it is more nuanced than saying well, thank you for inviting nuance. Yeah,
It wouldn't have worked on me when I was 17 and got recruited to my first action. And I think my friends who recruited me had the good judgment to know that it probably wouldn't work on me. But it wasn't like they made a deliberate choice. The first activist thing I ever did was go to a racial justice rally on my campus that my friends Yuko and Valerie told me about the night before and told me to go to the night before. And I had never done anything remotely political, and I had avoided most race spaces
right,
actually
right.
up until then. And but they were both women of color, and we were friends. I mean, I did always have friends of color, so you can't avoid race completely if you have friends of color.
Right.
And um, and uh, they they I mean, I guess they did say in that conversation, Rinku, you're not a girl anymore. You're a woman now, and you're not a minority. You're a person of color. So that was the hard push, but their manner was so. I just never doubted that they loved me,
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
they were telling me who I was supposed to be. And later they were like, oh, how self righteous of us trying to tell you who you're supposed to be. And
Right.
that's true, but I kind of need a little push at that moment
Right.
in my life.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so your friends often know, and just the last thing I want to say, because you mentioned crews, I do think in US social movements that a lot of strategy gets developed by cohorts of friends. And I
Right.
think if we could be more honest about that and more transparent about which friends and which crew and its assets and limitations and what other crews of friends they could hook up with,
Right.
I think it might help us be more direct about addressing power within the movement too.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, because it's what's happening. It's what's actually happening. I that was a major shift in my facilitation work too. And I'm like, all of the interesting conversations are happening around the fire. Oftentimes people are getting high, like having drinks, and like that's what they're bringing out to their home bases and to the other spaces, like the provocations there. So I'm like, how do we make a lot of room for that here, for that experience where like if most of the magic is happening in between the sessions, then how do we make the sessions more like what's happening in between? It's
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
to be honest, and to be honest about who you're talking to, who your people are, I think makes a lot of sense. um I want to move us towards the close. So a couple of things I have, two more questions to ask that are kind of questions I ask in the podcast, and then give you an opportunity for anything else that might have been left unsaid, and to say also like feel your body,
Mhm.
when you are in relationship with somebody, like know how you feel.
Mhm.
That's what's going to tell you, right?
Mhm.
There's something about truth, even if it's hard to hear, that if you're paying attention to your body, there's a layer of relief
Mhm.
in it.
Definitely.
There's a way in which the feedback is coming with a measure of acceptance. Like I remember learning from one of my mentors, and I use it so much in my coaching now. He was the best at giving feedback that anybody I knew, which is why he was a master
Mhm.
at coaching and facilitating. And I knew that he could give me feedback, sometimes in front of people, which was even more awkward. It was never about him. Usually, when we're giving somebody feedback, it's because they're pissing you off somehow,
Mhm.
right? But when we can be like, "You hurting yourself with this behavior," right? Like I mean it, right? Because I'm thinking about a friend who I actually like had a formal. It sounds ridiculous, but a formal unfriending
Mhm.
with friendship breakup, mainly because we were going to continue to exist in the same spaces, and we needed to negotiate how we were going to show, how we were going to talk about what was happening between us.
Mhm.
We were very close, but like she would tell the story differently. But what I felt was like I was being constantly judged by righteousness,
Mhm.
and even like when I had made a mistake, like there was a dogmatic way in which I had to address it, and like I felt like a pressure
Mhm.
to like deal with my personal life a certain way because it was the righteous way, and like uh, and then you're supposed to be like one of my closest and dearest, and like that didn't feel like love and care, it felt like enforcing, and so like your body and your heart tell you when something's off, and
Mhm.
sometimes you're getting into it because of old childhood shit, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah,
Like I often say, I grew up in a fundamentalist community, and I ended up in corners of the social movement that are behave just like fundamentalist religious communities, Yeah.
we can behave badly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, were you gonna say something before I asked you my closing questions? You also have time after.
No, I don't. I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question I like to ask, and it just it demands your consent because I'll invite you into a little time traveling,
Okay.
and the time travel is to 20 years from now, and you meet yourself 20 as you have become 20 years from now. You've won some things, you've lost some things, you've made some personal changes that you've tried to make, and some of your personal foibles continue to limit you, like the human experience. But enough time for a new generation to come into being. And I don't want you to describe her to me when you can keep that to yourself, but I do wonder what she would say to you if she time traveled from there to here. What what would she want to impart on you? What would older, wiser you say to you?
Honestly, I think she would say, just relax, like
Great.
chill, chill out, get some sleep. go for a walk, um, enjoy life. And yeah, I mean, work and life are very intertwined for me. Um, I try to have some boundaries on work, the official parts of work, but I am a person who's concerned with making the world better in certain ways. It's an obsessive concern. It's it's not that there isn't anything else, but
Mhm.
that's always at the front. And um, and yet sleep and yet I think she'd say like it's not that serious. And I should be like, do what you can, and but remember you're just one little speck
Yeah.
of stardust in this universe. And so if you need to sleep, go to bed.
Ashe. That's beautiful. I love her already. Hopefully we will have a hang 20 years from
Right,
now.
yes.
Um, but one thing you said, and I'll ask you my last question, reminds me of the title of a book of essays on indigenous perspective on the climate movement that is titled "We Are in the Middle of Forever,"
Hmm.
and that already changes, like how you live in order to make things right. It's like this is your one wild and precious life.
Hmm.
And yes, life will demand sacrifice. Yes, life will often force it upon you, great suffering. Yes, we want to stand for those who suffer, but we are in the middle of forever, and sometimes learning how to be a full human being is
Hmm.
the biggest gift that we can share with the people around us and with the world itself. Um, so the last question I ask of the powerful women that come on this show, in a world where patriarchy and its insanity have hurt women forever, but like Me Too here in the Western world, like just kind of exposed it, right? To all of us that didn't want to see it or want to talk about it or wanted to. And yeah, I mentioned the Betterment Project at the beginning of this call, and
Hmm.
it's a passionate commitment of mine. Um, as somebody that has caused harm.
Hmm.
And so the question I ask the powerful women such as yourself is, what should men do if we want to
What
be
should
better?
men do?
If we want to be better.
Ah, um, what should men do? Hmm. Um, the first thing that really comes to mind actually is listen. Like
Mm,
men just talk so much. It's like really just like if you could just shut up for a minute and like get into listening posture and be more self-aware of the like talky space that you're taking up, that would be good. Men are not the only people who talk a lot. I sometimes have to like tell myself, like extroverts often talk a lot
mm,
too. Um, but I find the male extrovert can really go on. And I've actually watched men on occasion like resist um, all efforts by women to get them to stop talking, like to no avail. So, if somebody's like flagging, like just you could just wrap that thought up, that sentence, and yeah, talk less, listen more.
Beautiful. Great. Great. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I've been doing in before like a big and deep retreat where like we're gonna go where it's gonna be intense.
Yeah,
I'll gather the men ahead of time. First of all, if
and
I'm
let them
curating,
talk to each other
just be
simultaneously
like
to
this
clear out
happens.
their systems.
Right, like, then it's like this happens. Um, like I did evolutionary leadership workshop this year, and for the first time we had an equal number of because usually the best thing to do is make a majority women or non-binary people. But this was the event, and so then I was like, let's show up. Let's show up differently. Like let's be aware. I'm not saying don't talk,
Mhm.
but I'm saying maybe you wait a couple of beats
Mhm.
before you jump in.
Mhm. Hey, can
Simple
I
thing.
add one thing to this advice? Actually,
Please,
I
please,
think a
please.
lot of your listeners are on conference panels and things. So if you're a man and you find yourself on a panel where all the other people are women, you don't have to say it's so awesome to be on this panel full of women. Like that should be the norm, and pointing it out is like weird, like
Great.
I've experienced that multiple times with the single man who's on whatever panel I'm on. And like, we don't need a reminder of how unusual it is to hear from women when
That's great.
the audience is about to hear from women. Yeah. And if you're a man who's being invited to talk on an all male panel, like, just don't do that.
Right, right. I'm just writing this down.
An all male panel that's about something other than men, for example.
Right. I love it. I like it. Yeah, just on principle, don't do it. I love it.
Thanks for giving me a chance to get a couple of pet peeves out. That's
Yeah, I know this is important. All of them is.
worth all,
Because like I'm sorry.
it's worth all the time.
Yeah, because it's like if you just go meta,
Yeah.
it's always good to be specific. Like this is what it looks like when you're doing that.
Yeah.
Like it's just helpful, I think, especially for men who don't want to hear it. So we get dumber as the advice comes. Thank you. I am paying attention to the advice myself. And is there anything else you want us to know about where to find you? I'll have it
Oh,
in the
yeah.
show notes on your team.
Narrativeinitiative.org. Sign up on our email list. We have wonderful programs and webinars and just fun stuff to do. Our newsletter is awesome and, both cute and useful. So, yeah, sign up on our email list at narrativeinitiative.org and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Rinku Writes.
Beautiful. Awesome. What a privilege to be with you. This was a
Same.
phenomenal conversation. Signal versus noise. There's so much competing for our attention. And I am so glad that you stayed with us through the end of the podcast. It should mean that you're finding something meaningful here. Hopefully, something worth sharing. And so I'm asking again that you think of somebody who would be touched by this conversation, who wants to be a part of it some way. It is a decentralized conversation. It is a way in which we're changing ourselves by leaning in towards each other in places like this and in the exchange of these ideas. So, who's a person or two that will be specially moved by what you've heard here today? Send them a text, an email. Let them know we're here. We're not trying to reach everybody, but we want to reach the right people. We want to keep having this decentralized conversation. We want to keep working on getting right to the edge of the evolution of consciousness and culture to see what we find here together. Thank you again for being a part of this. Liking the podcast helps. Subscribing is definitely a good thing. Feedback is always welcomed. Stay in touch.